Friends from Austria. I'm very excited to be offering another presentation on December 4th of this year and discussing the very important topic of the homeopathic treatment of mental and emotional disorders. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and talk a little bit about the presentation and actually share a short case with you as well. So this is a very important topic in homeopathy. There's a whole section of the organon, Aphorisms 210 to 230, that specifically discuss this issue. And of course, we've learned a lot more about the treatment of mental and emotional disorders since the 6th edition of the organon, but still, there's a great deal to learn from the organon in terms of how to address these types of cases and how to follow up with them and manage them over a period of time. And I'm going to go into that in just a little bit more detail in just a second. But before I do that, I'd like to just talk about a case that I had a little while back where I was teaching at the Czech summer school. Basically, it's teaching for 8 days, like 10 hours a day. It's a kind of a grueling experience, but really worthwhile. The people are lovely. And as you can see here, the Czech countryside is absolutely beautiful. In any case, I was invited to speak on 3 different topics. The first was the homeopathic treatment of asthma. The second was the use of bowel nozos in homeopathic practice. And the third was the Bönninghausen repertory, known as the therapeutic pocketbook method. And I started my presentation talking about the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, and I could see from the faces of the people in the audience that they weren't happy, that they didn't want me to talk about a book from 1846, that they would prefer that I talk about the new ideas in homeopathy and the new remedies, and which are all very important, of course, but that's really what they wanted me to focus on. But I know the value of the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, so I persisted, and I continued to talk about it and present cases. And on the second day, I began to discuss what are called one-sided cases. These are cases where there's a paucity of symptomatology and how you could use the therapeutic pocketbook repertory effectively in these types of cases. And during the break, on the lunch break of the second day, a woman came up to me and she said, I've got this, my daughter's got this terrible impetigo. Can you help her? Here's a photograph of her daughter. She showed me the photograph. And it's actually quite a bit worse than what you're seeing here, because here there's a salve that's sitting on top of the ulceration. And it's ulcerated in the center with blisters on the outside, and it's aggressively spreading from the left cheek to the right cheek. Now, this was an accomplished homeopathic practitioner who'd given a number of remedies. I think she gave mersurium and mercury and graphites and sulfur, but to no effect whatsoever. And she said, can you help? And I said, well, why don't we just do the case in front of the class, and I'll use the therapeutic pocketbook repertory. Now, it was indeed a one-sided case. There weren't a lot of symptoms at all. It was ulcerated in the center with blisters surrounding it. It was worse at night. It was worse opening the mouth, but you'd be surprised if it wasn't worse opening the mouth. I mean, look at the situation here. It was worse with touch, but again, you'd be surprised if it wasn't worse with touch. I mean, this is, you would be surprised if you touched it and it didn't feel bad. And then finally, there was a sensation as if there were crawling insects. Now, if I use a contemporary repertory like Synthesis or the Complete Repertory, and I employ these particular rubrics, I'm going to get dozens and dozens and dozens of remedies. But the advantage of the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, it's also one of its limitations, but one of its advantages is that it only has 125 remedies. And so if you just repertorize these particular symptoms in the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, you only come up with one remedy. And that remedy was mercury. And so I opened up Hahnemann's chronic diseases, and I showed him that in the symptoms of mercury were an exact match of this particular case. I asked the patient, the mother, to give the child 1 dose of 30C in solution, succussing 7 times between each dose, and to give it every 20 to 30 minutes. This is an aggressively spreading type of condition, and I thought it was necessary to match the intensity of the condition and the pace of the condition with the posology approach that was being employed. She only had an 18C at home, so I said, well, start with the 18C, and as soon as you acquire the 30C, go ahead and switch over to the 30C. With the very first dose of 18C, immediately this aggressively spreading impetigo stopped. Later on that day, they got the 30C, and they began to administer that. And 60 hours later, this is 2.5 days later, 60 hours later, she went from looking like this to looking like this. Again, let me show you that. She went from looking like this to looking like this. And this is perhaps the most profound experience I've ever had in homeopathy. I've seen some miracles, very serious health problems being cured, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, a case of schizophrenia, which I'm going to present during our my December 4th presentation. But this is particularly remarkable because theoretically, your skin should not be able to heal this quickly. Yes, she was young. Yes, her life force, her vital force was quite strong, but even so, this is a miraculous cure and shows you the power of homeopathy. So with that quick preface, and just to demonstrate what homeopathy is capable of accomplishing, let me talk a little bit about my presentation on December 4th. I plan to present a case of a 26-year-old schizophrenic. It's quite a dramatic case. I have a follow-up on video with the mother and the patient himself, and you'll see some remarkable results using homeopathy with a schizophrenic. I'm also going to be discussing autism spectrum disorders, some of the common and unusual remedies. I've got 2 interesting cases to present with regard to ASD disorders. I'll be talking about Helleborus in a little bit of detail, very interesting remedy that's effective for a number of different types of health issues. I'll also be talking about anhelonium as well, and I'll be comparing anhelonium with cannabis indica or cannabis sativa. And I'll also be talking a little bit about potency and dose. It's a subject that is oftentimes confusing for students in homeopathy. I'll be looking at it from a historical perspective, but also as it applies to these particular cases. I'll also be discussing the idea of using water solutions. This was introduced in the 1833 5th edition of the Organon, and was also continued in the 6th edition of the Organon, which was finished in February of 1842, but was not published until 1921. And this is the use of what we call the Q potencies. Sometimes people refer to these as the LM potencies. I prefer to call them the Q potencies, which you can ask me about at a later time. But this is an important method that was introduced in the 5th edition using the water solutions, and that was continued on into the 6th edition. So that's what I'll be planning to discuss during the presentation. It'll be a lively discussion. I think you should get a lot out of it. I'll be discussing materia medica, posology, cases of serious mental and emotional disorders. I'll also be presenting a case on bipolar disorder as well, which is a very interesting case, especially since that particular case, the patient was on the use of Lithobid, which is a medication, a conventional medication that they use for bipolar disorders. And I think it should be a fun, engaging, and fruitful learning experience for everyone who participates. I'm very excited to be presenting for you on the 4th of December, and look forward to seeing you all in person. Thank you very much.